All right, we are ready to look at Mark 5 as we work our way through this gospel. This is the outline that we're following. We borrow from L.A. Stauffer. We are obviously in the Galilean ministry. And so Mark, being the quick, rapid writer that he is, gets to the Galilean ministry quickly, and he will get through with it quickly. But as we are in the Galilean ministry, we expand that section, and we are in the identity section. We saw his popularity build, we saw the conflict started, and then we see the teaching section of the parables in chapter 4. And then we're in this identity section, which carries us from chapter 4:35, part of chapter 4, all of chapter 5, and the first 6 verses of chapter 6, according to this outline at least. And so we're going to be looking at some evidence of his identity in our study today, and that will be 3 different miracles as we get to that. Let's review where we've been. Chapter 1. All right, this is the beginning of the Galilean ministry. I mentioned a moment ago, Mark quickly got to that. Didn't take him very long. Took Matthew 4 chapters to get there. Mark got to it right quickly. Chapter 2. Yeah, here's the conflict with the Pharisees. So we move from that popularity building real quickly in chapter 1, beginning of chapter 2, till here we have the conflict started in chapter 2. Chapter 3. Yeah, more of that controversy over the Sabbath healing. And then chapter 4, parables, dealt with the parables. Now, Mark didn't deal with a lot of those, but he gets the point across, as we mentioned in our study last time. Let's go to questions for today. Question number 1, what's the main point of this chapter? Yeah, miracles, 3 miracles. And miracles always were for the purpose of confirming the claim. That is, if the apostles worked miracles, they were claiming that what they were teaching was true, claiming Jesus was raised from the dead. The miracles would confirm their claim. When Jesus made the claim, I am the Son of God, his miracles confirmed his claim. And so we have that evidence given here in this chapter. All right, we'll come back to our questions here in just a second. All right, here's what happens in Mark 5, 3 miracles. The first is found in verses 1 to 20, and this is the casting of the unclean spirits, plural, into the herd of swine. So here is a demon-possessed man / men being healed. And so if you've studied ahead, you know why I mentioned men. And the casting of those spirits into the swine. Then there is another section here that generally by some is considered as one story. There's actually 2 stories within one, and that is the raising of the daughter of Jairus. And within that story, on his way to the house of Jairus, there is this woman with the issue of blood that's healed. And then we come back to the story of Jairus and his daughter. So I'll list those as 3, and as we look at the story of the raising of the daughter of Jairus, we're going to look at that entirety and then come back and look at that woman right in the middle of that. Make sense? All right, let's get underway here. Let's talk about the parallel accounts for what that's worth. We don't always list the parallel accounts. But this story, there's actually 2 stories here, actually 3, but the second one is divided into 2. The first story, there are parallel accounts in Matthew 8 and in Luke 8. John doesn't mention this at all for what that may be worth to us. And that's quite common as we look at the synoptics. The second story that has these 2 stories, 2 healings there, is mentioned in Matthew 9 and in Luke 8. Again, nothing is mentioned in Mark. We're going to allude to those other references because there's some information that's pertinent to our understanding given in those parallel accounts. So let's get underway here. At verse 1, in fact, we have question number 2. Where was this located? Where is this story located? Gadarenes, yes. All right, let's take notice of that. Look at verse 1. They came to the other side of the sea, that's the Sea of Galilee, the Sea of Tiberias, to the country of the Gadarenes. Now, you're reading from a translation that may say, and your footnote may say, the Gerasenes, or there may be another term that's used, as in Matthew's account. Those are all referring to the same region. So let's get our focus as to where we are. This obviously is the Sea of Galilee. There is not a specific city identified here, such as he went to Capernaum. That's a particular city. But this is the region of, or in the area of, is what the text is actually saying. So it's on this side of the Sea of Galilee, on this southwest side. Gadara, Gadarenes, it's because it's in that region. This city is alluded to in some of the names. So it's somewhere in this region on the southwest side of the Sea of Galilee, in the direction of Decapolis. Now you see Decapolis right here. We're going to talk about Decapolis at the end of the story at verse 20 here in just a moment. But that's the region. There were large cliffs that went off into the sea in this region, where there were tombs, caves or tombs, and that's where we are going to find some events taking place. All right, now we know the region or the area. Let's get another question out of our way here. No, we're not going to do that just yet. We'll come back. Let's look at verses 1 to 5, the condition of this man or men. And so why am I mentioning men? If you've read the text talks about there was a man with an unclean spirit. Well, Matthew mentions two men here. And Luke mentions a man, and Mark mentions a man. John doesn't mention anybody. So how do we harmonize that? Well, it's perhaps the man that is identified in Mark and Luke may have been one, and this is conjecture, I recognize, I can't prove that. It may be that he was creating more problem than the other man, and so he's the focal point of Mark and of Luke, where Matthew mentions there were two men. Were there two men? Well, Matthew says there were. I take that Matthew's right about that. But the focal point seems to be on one particular man. And perhaps he was creating more disturbance and was more chaotic in his behavior than the other man. I don't know that, but that makes more sense than why if they were equal in their effect, why was the focal point of Mark and Luke on just one of those two men? But anyway, let's get the picture of what's going on. In verses 1 to 5, Jesus came out of the boat, and this man, he met him out of the tombs, a man, or Matthew's account, men, with an unclean spirit. Now, the unclean spirit is identified and equated with demons, plural, that we'll talk about here in a moment. They're used interchangeably. Verse 12, for example. He's living in the tombs. And so he's driven out from the town or towns, wherever he may have been living, because he cannot dwell there because of his behavior, and he's uncontrollable. And we'll talk about what's controlling him here in a moment, but he's living in tombs. I believe it was Stouffer, maybe another writer, that suggested that some of the tombs in the cliffs along that region would have been hewn out of rock, or maybe they were caves where there would be places where they would place bodies, and he perhaps is sleeping and living within the tombs. Now, let's see more about his description. We'll add Matthew and Luke's description of him that's not mentioned here. What else do we see at verse 3? They couldn't bind him even with chains. If they bound him with chains, and apparently they had, what would he do? He breaks the chains. Great strength. They tried shackles, and he broke those to pieces, and no one could tame him. That is, they couldn't subdue him. They're not trying to tame him like an animal, but they're trying to subdue him, get him under control. No one's able to do that. He's out of control. Always, night and day, he was in the mountains. He's driven out of the cities because of all the chaos he creates. He would be crying out. That is, he's crying and screaming aloud. And he's cutting himself with stones. And so he's mutilating himself. Matthew's account says he was fierce. That's an interesting word. And so he's a very powerful man. He seems to be, at least people are afraid of him. He's dangerous. Luke adds this that Mark implies later, but he doesn't say anything now. Luke 8:27 says that he was wearing no clothes. And later we find him in his right mind and he's clothed. There's an implication in that. We'll leave that for the time being. Anyway, that's the description of what Jesus finds as he gets out of the boat on that southwest side of the Sea of Galilee, here is a man that's just basically wild. Now let's talk about demon possession for a moment. What we learn from this text. We're going to look at Jesus having power over three areas in our study today. And the first is he has power over the spirit world. Now it would be amazing if Jesus had power over disease. We'll look at it in a moment. But the spirit world, demons had power over him. You'd still be amazed at his power, wouldn't you? But he has power over the spirit world, and the spirit world has limitations of power. How so? Well, notice the demons, plural, have power over the man to control the man. If the man had the ability just to cast out these demons himself, why hadn't he already done that? Why is he living in the caves or in the tombs? And why is he driven away from his hometown? The demons had power over him. But take notice of this. The demons, though by the power of Satan, could not leave their assigned habitation without God's permission. Did you take notice of that? They couldn't leave their assigned habitation. When they saw Jesus, we're about to get to that, he's about to do something with us. Please don't send us here, don't send us there, send us over there. We'll get to all the specifics of that in a moment. They could not leave their assigned habitation without divine permission. Get that point? Showing he has power, Jesus has power over the demons. But the demons have limitations of power. Does that make sense? Else, why didn't they asked permission to go into the swine? Why didn't they do that already? Why didn't they beat Jesus to that? They couldn't. They had to ask permission for that. Does that make sense? So they could not leave their habitation without divine permission. So, I'm not going to get into I don't think there's demon possession today, but I'm not getting into that or ready to branch out into that. That's not our point. We're wanting to see the flow of this text. Make sense? All right. Now let's begin at verse 6. Notice these demons, these unclean spirits, which are many. We'll get to let's not get ahead of ourselves to the number yet. We're just working through and we just pretend we don't know how many. But at this point, it seems like there's just one demon. So the demons seem to be unified in the sense that at times the demons are referred to as he, as if they're speaking as one, and then there are many. Does that make sense? So notice at verse 6, when he saw Jesus, that is the man, he ran and worshiped him, and he cried with a loud voice, "What have I to do with you?" The demons are speaking through him. Jesus, the Son of the Most High God. Now before we get through with verse 7, what do the demons recognize about Jesus? They recognize his deity, that he's the Son of the Most High of the living God. So they recognize who he is. They know his power. They know he has power over them. And so they say, "I implore." Your footnote may say, "I adjure thee." That is a form of an oath. In other words, they're asking him, "Give an oath to us that you do not torment. I implore you by God that you do not torment me." The demons are speaking as if they're one person in this man. They're not, but we'll say, one being, but they're not. Now, Luke adds this for what it's worth to you. Luke 8:31, "Don't cast us into the abyss." The same word translated abyss in Luke 8 is translated bottomless pit in Revelation 20. The realm, I take it to have reference to the realm for the evil spirits, and we'll get to that more at verse 10. I think verse 10, if you want to flag, verse 10 and verse 7 are talking about the same place. I'm going to say that again because when we get to verse 7, you'll already be there with me. I think verse 10 and verse 7 are talking about the same place. We'll say more about that in a moment. But they recognize Jesus has power to torment them. I think the demons are recognizing they will be tormented in the end of time. They will be tormented if they're cast into the abyss, in the realm of the departed spirits, and that is in that part of Gehenna wherein there is suffering. So Jesus had said, "Come out of the man, unclean spirit." I take that verse 8 had happened before they make the plea of verse 7. Does that make sense? Before he had said that. In other words, Jesus had said to the man, "Come out, unclean spirit," and the spirits now are concerned. What are they concerned about? Where are we going to go? Do not torment us. Promise me you will not torment us. And so Jesus asked, "What's the name?" And what was the name? Why? We call legion. There are many. A legion is somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000. Most think around 6,000 was a number that was used to refer to the number of soldiers in the Roman army. So 4,000 to 6,000. So let's split the difference. 5,000, let's just say. It doesn't make much difference. When you get to 4,000 to 6,000, I don't think it makes much difference. So here are thousands of demons that have occupied this man. Yes. They don't want to go there. And I think that reference, as well as this, I think, is talking about Tartarus, that region of the departed spirits in the Hadean realm where those who are wicked abide. Now, verse 10, to finish that second section as he approaches, "And he begged him earnestly that he would not send them out of the country." Now, let's talk about country there. I'm not convinced that the country means send us out of this region. Please do not send us out of Decapolis or the Galilean region. Don't send us down to Judea. I think they're interested in that. I think what they're interested in, that it has reference to the country referring to the earth. Don't cast us out of the earth into the abyss. You say, what makes you think they're talking about the abyss? Luke records in Luke 8 that they requested not to go to the abyss. So don't cast us out of this country. Don't cast us out of this region. Don't cast us out of this land into the abyss. Does that make sense? I'm trying to harmonize two statements, and that makes sense. So again, hopefully you're already there. Verse 10, I think he's talking about the same place of verse 7. And Luke 8:31, for what that may be worth to us. All right. Now then, Jesus cast the spirits into the swine, verses 11 to 13. Now what's interesting is there was a large herd of swine. How many swine were there? 2,000, verse 13. And they made the request, "Send us into the swine." Why didn't they go there themselves? Because they did not have that power. And that Jesus once gave them permission. They could not move without divine permission. So I'm learning from this, and make a marginal note somewhere, Jesus has power over the spirit world. That's what we've learned from this story. He has power over the spirit world. He has power over demons. He has power over Satan. All right? And so he gave permission, and they went, and then what happened to the herd? Yeah, they ran violently down the hill. Now, this would not be an amazing scene, I don't think, if you saw one swine run down a hill violently like something went crazy and he goes off and he drowned in the sea. But a whole herd of 2,000 swine run violently down the hill and drown in the sea. Now, let's talk about the reaction. What was the reaction, verses 14 to 20? All right. So, notice at verse 14, those that fed the swine fled, they ran away. And they went and told what happened. And so people came out to see what had happened. And there's nothing to see except you don't see any swine out there anymore. All that herd of swine, yeah, I remember that herd of swine. Remember the thousands out here, yeah. Where are they? Well, they're down there in the sea. They all drowned in the sea down there. And they found him sitting and clothed in his right mind. In other words, he's calm. He's no longer this fierce guy. He's sitting and he has clothes on and he's in his right mind, which means he was not in his right mind and they were afraid. Now then, They told what had happened about the swine, and then verse 17, they begin to plead for him to depart from the region. We have a question about that. What question is that? Verse 4, question number 4. Why did they ask him to leave? In other words, they tell Jesus, you just worked a miracle. Get out of here. We want you to go. They were afraid. Luke 8, verse 37 says they did that for fear. They're afraid. Anyone who has this power that can cause these demons to go in the herd of swine and then go down violent down the hill, we're not sure what he's doing. We don't have a good picture of him. They're afraid. And they ask him to leave the region. So he does. So when he gets into the boat, now what happens? The man who'd been healed, I want to go with you. And Jesus said, no. You might bracket off verse 19. And he tells him, go home to your friends and tell what great things the Lord has done for you and how he's had compassion on you. Now, why bracket that off? Might make a marginal note. There's the key to evangelism. I don't know of a better description of evangelism than that. Go home, tell your friends what the Lord's done for you and the compassion he had for you. That's evangelism. Let me tell you what the Lord did for me. I was in sin. And it had not been for the Lord, I would be lost eternally. The Lord had compassion on me, and here's what he did for me. That's evangelism. Did he do it? Yeah, you bet he did that. He went to Decapolis, according to verse 20, and told what Jesus had done, and people were marveling. Well, that's in this region down here. So the miracle takes place up here, and so down in this region of Decapolis, he's off telling people exactly what's happened to him. All right. Key to evangelism. All right. Now let's move on. I took a little more time with that than I probably should have. Let's talk about the raising of the daughter of Jairus. There are 3 occasions where Jesus raised the dead. This is one, the raising of the daughter of Jairus. The second would be, or a second one would be, Lazarus, John 11. And a third one, the raising of the son of the widow of Nain. Yeah, good. Am I commending myself for that? I think I gave the answer. The raising of the son of the widow of Nain. All right, and Lazarus and this. Those are 3 occasions where Jesus raised the dead. So it's one of 3. All right. I want to quickly work through this because I want to get to the third miracle there. Jesus again gets into the boat, and when he gets out on the other side, he goes across the sea again. He comes, and there's a throng of people. The throng is very important for the story, particularly the third story that we're going to look at. Now, there is a ruler of the synagogue. Matthew doesn't identify him. Mark and Luke do, as Jairus. Must have been known in the region. He was the ruler of the synagogue. What was the ruler of the synagogue? He was an administrator. He was the custodian. He supervised the preparation of the synagogue for their services. And so he is a man in the Jewish religion. He has some power. He has some authority. And he comes and he falls down at Jesus' feet. And he begged him, my little daughter, who, by the way, verse 42 says she was how old? 12 years old. Luke identifies that as well. Matthew does not, I don't think. And said, my daughter is at the point of death. Come lay your hands on her and she will live. And so Jesus went with him and a great multitude followed. Now we have another story. We're going to skip that story for a moment. We're coming back. But we've got to harmonize this with Matthew's account. Matthew says the man said to him, my daughter just died. But at this point she had not. So I'm taking that Matthew's story is picking up where verse 35 basically picks up. Because in the throng, as Jesus is making his way to him, that someone comes from the ruler's house and said, your daughter is dead. So I think that's the harmony of the stories. He did come to Jesus, said, my daughter is near death. Would you come and lay your hands on her? And then somewhere along the procession, the message comes, the daughter's dead. Don't bother me anymore. And my daughter just died. So which did he say? He said both. Had to, because the record records him making both of those statements. All right, let's pick up at verse 35. So Jesus has turned to deal with this woman, And while he's still talking to the woman, here a messenger comes and said, this girl's died. Don't bother the master anymore. And what does Jesus say to the man? Yeah, don't be afraid, just only believe. And so he didn't permit anyone to go with him except Peter and James and John. And they came to the house, and there was wailing. No, you can imagine a 12-year-old child dying. And when Jesus raised the question, why is this commotion? She's not dead but sleeping. What was their reaction? They laughed him to scorn. And he then took the father and the mother and those that were with him, and he said to the young girl, Talitha Kumi. That's Aramaic. Talitha simply means little girl, young girl. Kumi means come forth, arise. And so he says to the young girl in Aramaic, young girl, arise. And she did. And she was about 12 years of age. Now, verse 42, I don't have time to develop this. They were overcome with great amazement. You might look at the original wording of that. It gives the idea not just that they were astounded, they were overwhelmed with amazement. So much so, Jesus seems to be the only one that has a clear mind. This girl has been sick and now she's restored. He has to remind them, you need to give her something to eat. And they're just so excited they forget about feeding her. And you need to give her something to eat. Now, here's what I learned from that. Jesus has power over death. Jesus has power over death. He had power over the spirit world. He has power over death. This is amazing power. All right? Now then, quickly, I wanted to list some. I don't have time to go through all these. This is from a sermon on the raising of the daughter of Jairus. Here's a man who swallowed his pride to come to Jesus. That's a lesson we learn. I see strong faith. He didn't say, if you come and see if you can heal her, but she will be healed if you come. I see how some people question what the Lord can do. There's no need in him coming. She's dead. There's nothing he can do now. Others laughed him to scorn. We question the Lord in our own day and time. I see that sorrow is minimized if there's a resurrection. They were sorrowing, but now they're amazed. What changed their tune? They saw a resurrection. And then last on that, the reaction to the power of Jesus. They were amazed at the power of the resurrection, and they went and told everybody. There's a lot of practical things from that story. All right, now let's go back in the middle of that. As he's making his way in the throng of people, now what happens? All right, very good. Yeah, she didn't get any better from her physicians, but only got worse. This must have been some hemorrhaging that was going on within her body. And she had heard that Jesus come, and she comes behind him. And verse 28 says, if I may just touch his clothes. Matthew 9, Luke 8 says, if she could just touch the hem of his garment. That's interesting. Not just his clothes. If I could just get a good hand grip on his clothes, but if I could just even touch the very border or the hem of his garment, I think there'll be something good come from that. I think I could be healed. And so we had a question. What question number is that? Question number 6. Why would Jesus say, who touched me? Because power went out of him. What'd you say?
For a lesson.
For a lesson, yeah. Well, before I go into that, anybody else? Why would he ask that? Because he knows, he knew who touched him. All right. That's a good point. Okay. Yeah, she's been unclean, and so now that she's cleansed of her disease, there's a question about going before the priest. He's calling forth for some admission from the woman. In other words, would the throng of people known anything? She touches and she's healed. Jesus knows it, she knows it, and let's just rewrite the script just for a moment and pretend we could rewrite that. And she never says a word, Jesus never says a word. Does anybody know this woman was healed? No. She just touches the hem of his garment and she feels it in her body. It's not like she has a leg that's too short and it suddenly grows out and people don't take note. There's something going on within and she's healed immediately. So Jesus is calling forth for her to admit. And he perceived, it tells of the power he had to perceive, that power went out from him and somebody was just healed. And so he's calling forth for some admission. So here's what I'm learning from this, and we're going to finish the story. Jesus has power over disease, over the spirit world, over death, and over disease. So this is a powerful text. Let's just back up and get the view of the text, and then we're going to come back and finish that story. That we saw, we're talking about Jesus, the identity of Jesus in this section, chapters 4, 5, and 6. Part of 4, and all of 5, and part of 6. And in that identity, we're seeing he has power over death, he has power over disease, and he has power over the spirit world. Does that make sense? All right. Now let's go back to the story. Jesus, knowing power had gone from him, asked, "Who touched my clothes?" And the disciples said, they kind of ridiculed him at verse, the multitude around. I don't know if you've ever been in a crowd where you just up like, and these people are pushing and shoving, and if you were to ask, well, who was it that just touched me? Well, I guess nearly everybody. What do you mean, who touched you? And that's what the disciples were. Sure somebody touched you. And so finally the woman comes back trembling and falls before him and told the whole truth. There's something to be said about that. We'll come back to that if time permits. And Jesus says to her, "Your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Be healed of your affliction." Now, let's learn some lessons from that. Then we'll come back to our questions that have been handed out. There's a lesson from this story about worthless physicians. Physicians had taken her money and she didn't get any better. In fact, she got worse. You say, yeah, I've been to some of those doctors. Well, I'm not interested in real physicians. I'm interested in spiritual physicians. The spiritually sick seek help from worthless physicians. They go to denominational preachers who mislead them and misdirect them. We turn to brethren who preach a softer message and don't deal with sin. We turn to brethren who preach error. Some of the popular literature that the world is reading that's supposed to edify and lift us up is nothing but fluff. We're going to worthless physicians, and they're not making us better. They make us worse. That's practical, isn't it? Here's another practical lesson. The miracle was immediate. It didn't take time. It didn't that she touched the hem of his garment and she came back 3 months later and said, you know what, I'm a little bit better. I was hemorrhaging, but I'm not as bad as I was. I think a miracle has been performed. She felt it in her body. Immediately there was reaction. Contrasted to miracles so-called today. Fear demands telling the whole truth. Notice she came back fearing and trembling and she told the whole truth. If we fear God, we're going to tell the whole truth. We're not going to conceal things to mislead. You can tell an outright lie, but sometimes what you say is true, but you're concealing some information so that you paint a different story. That's dishonest. Fearing God means you tell the whole truth. And it means you preach the whole counsel of God too, if you fear God. All right, here's another lesson I learned from this story. And that is strong faith. Her faith had to be strong to think, if I just touch the hem of his garment. It'd be strong if she said, I wished you could lay both hands on my head so that I would be healed. But she didn't ask for that. She didn't even ask to get a good grip of his garment. If I could just touch the hem, the border of his garment. That's strong faith. That's real strong faith. I learned that disciples at times are slow to catch on. Because Jesus had a purpose in asking, who touched me? And they immediately kind of ridicule, what do you mean who touched you? There's a crowd. There's a throng of people. What do you mean who touched you? There are times that I may not understand what the Lord is doing, but there's a reason for it. I may not understand why he recorded all that he did, but he has a purpose. Why did he mention this story 5 times in the Psalms? Why didn't he just mention it once? He had a purpose. I may not know it, but I just got to trust the Lord. Or I may not know why he demands some things that he does, but he has a reason. Or I may not know why he didn't say or reveal more. Why didn't he tell me more about this story? I don't know. Here's a reason. Does that make sense? Let's get one more here. We often receive more than we ask. The woman wanted healing, but she got more. He gave her a blessing of peace. And we often get more than we ask for. All right, let's go to our questions now. Let's go to question number 9. Notice at verse 43. We didn't talk about this, but Jesus commanded them to strictly that that no one should know it. He just healed this girl, 12-year-old girl, and they're amazed and they're ecstatic and they're so excited they forget to feed her. And he said, "No, whoa. Don't go out and tell this everywhere." Seems strange. Why? Question 9. All right. That's not his main purpose. Very good. What else?
You want to contain his popularity for the time, give him a little more one-on-one time with people, and not have such a great multitude around him all.
Yes, the throng of people could be a distraction. While the message of Jesus needs to go to the hearts of the throng of people can be detrimental to his work. And so he didn't want that throng of people all around. And plus, and we've repeated this several times, the time for the full declaration has not yet come. He's laying groundwork. And as often, for example, maybe this is not the best illustration. When you're trying to teach someone the gospel, you may need to lay some foundations before you try to build the house on top of that. And sometimes I have been where somebody may be trying to help me in a class, and I'm laying my foundation, and somebody starts building the house over here, and I'm thinking, whoa, hang on, we're not ready for that yet. We haven't got the foundation laid yet. Hang on. And it's not time for full declaration yet. Make sense? Question number 10, practical things. We've got a couple of minutes, I think, to go, and so that gives us time to work those in. Practical things you've learned from chapter 5. All right, yeah. Tell the whole truth, as this woman did. Yes, ma'am.
When she came to him and had faith to touch his garment, that was one level of faith. But when she opened up in front of others and admitted what the whole truth was, he says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." But then he adds, "And be healed of your disease." That's a continuing. So it kind of gives me the idea that had she not been open with her faith, then she may not have continued to be healed. And us being healed of ourselves is one level of faith, but us proclaiming it to others is a different level that helps in our continuing.
Good observation. Very good. Kevin?
One thing that I just thought I was reading about the demons, they were afraid to go to be punished. They didn't want to go. That just makes me even more not want to go. Because if they're already living the way they are, I certainly don't.
They knew that was their ultimate goal. Their ultimate destination. And they didn't want to go there just yet. We're going to stop at that point right there. Chapter 6 next time.